Hey everybody, it's Gladys with Creatively Sustainable, and today I've got something for you I think you will find very helpful. This came from Jess at Roots and Refuge Farms, where she said she wanted people to put together a video talking about their most reliable resources for leading a more sustainable life and building resiliency. So today, I've got a stack of books I want to share with you. These are books that I have turned to again and again. Some of them I've had for years. Some of them are fairly new purchases, but these are all books that I have used. And I want to tell you a little bit about what I like about them, why I found them useful, and hopefully it'll help you decide if it's a good purchase for you. So to start with, I have two books, actually. They're both by the same author, Doris Janzen Longacre. They were both initially published in the 1970s. This was the first one published, The More with Less Cookbook. And then a few years later came out with Living More with Less. I found these in the bookstore in 1987. And I debated whether or not to buy one or both, so I bought Living More with Less. Took it home, read through it, and really had my view of the world and my place in it completely shifted. Mrs. Longacre was a Mennonite, and the book was put together with suggestions from other Mennonites, and many of them who have been missionaries. So you've got suggestions from all over the world about how people live, how people do with things, and how they live more with less. It's about less consumption, less using less resources, and also just about your place in the world and getting along with others. It blew my mind. So much so that I went back 2 weeks later and bought the More with Less cookbook to get the recipe. The recipes are great because they talk about using less of a lot of things. So many of the recipes that use meat that are set to serve 4 to 6 people use half a pound of meat. So if you're looking to cut back a little bit to use fewer resources, this could be really good. Some of the information, though, I feel is a little dated. Most of the recipes call for using margarine, and I would replace that with butter. At the end of each chapter, there is a section called Using the Scraps, and it talks about little bits and pieces you may have left over, ways to use them in other recipes so that they don't have to be thrown out. And they also put at the top sometimes notes from the contributor about changes you could make or different ways of doing things, or where even the recipe came from, how they learned about it. So I recommend it, and I think you'll find it useful as well. Sticking with cookbooks, the next one is a fairly recent purchase I got a couple years ago. It is Wild Fermentation by Sandor, Ellix, Katz. And you may have heard about this because he is a lot of times known as Sandor Kraut. And I tried making sauerkraut, and the first batch came out pretty good. I was thrilled. And then subsequently, they weren't working quite so well. And I finally decided I needed to get the book. I need step-by-step instructions to get me started. And then once I get a feel for how things go, then I'm more likely to kind of wing it and just go by instinct. But I have also found this to be a valuable resource in fermenting other foods. So I've used it to make some fermented dill pickles, which are quite tasty. And I also fermented some extra carrots I had from the garden last year. There's also a section in here on different beverages you can ferment, and one on sourdough bread, which I'm going to be trying next. And speaking of sourdough, I also recommend Bittman bread by Mark Bittman and Kerri Conan. This is about making sourdough bread with whole grains, which was something I was really interested in. I bought this last year. I made the starter, and I made quite a few batches of bread. The recipe is very easy to follow. As with sourdough, there's not a lot of hands-on time, but the entire process takes time, so you really have to plan it out. And I've got a couple of sewing books I also want to recommend, because if we are able to mend and repair our clothes and make them last longer, that's a savings of money and resources. Both of these are by the same author, Katrina Rodabaugh. And first I have Make, Thrift, Mend, and Mending Matters. Stitch, patch, repair your favorite denim and more. So, and this one is a lot similar things where it's stitch, patch, darn, plant, dye, and love your wardrobe. And this one I recently pulled out because she has the instructions in here on taking avocado pits to create a dye to use. And I had a couple of avocados on my tree this year, and I've saved the pits, so I'm looking forward to trying that. But both of these have great step-by-step instructions on lots of color photos, explanations, things like that on how to repair things. There's a lot about doing visible mending and ways you can do it, suggestions, and a lot of instructions on doing patches, different things like that. So you don't even have to be an expert sewer to find some value in these, because it can give you some tips and information to get you started just learning to sew things up and sew them well so that you get more life out of them. And now I've got some gardening books I want to share, and I focus on two areas with these because they are what apply to my gardening efforts. And one, it's small space or container gardening, because everything I've got, except for a few fruit trees, are grown in containers on my patio. So that's the gardening I start with. And the second one is Florida gardening, because I live in zone 9B on the Atlantic coast of Florida, which is, it's a very different type of gardening from much of the rest of the country. So first we'll start with some of the smaller space gardening. And first up is Field Guide to Urban Gardening by Kevin Espiritu. You may be familiar with him from Epic Gardening and Epic Homesteading. But this is one, it says how to grow plants no matter where you live, balconies and rooftops, raised beds, vertical gardening, indoor edibles, and hydroponics. He goes through and lists, you can probably see I've highlighted some things there about different materials to use, how to make your own potting soil, or suggestions on what to buy if you buy, based on what kind of a house you live in, growing suggestions, maintaining your raised beds and containers, growing things indoors, microgreens, there's a variety of stuff in here. So if you are growing in a less traditional space, this is a great one to check out, because you're sure to find some suggestions for you in there. And then I also have Fresh Food from Small Spaces, The Square Inch Gardener's Guide to Year-Round Growing, Fermenting, and Sprouting. And it is by R.J. Ruppenthal. I've had this book probably for 10 to 12 years, and I purchased it when I was living in an apartment in Memphis before I moved, because it gives so many good suggestions on growing things in small spaces. And I really liked it because it talked a lot about fermenting, it talked about sprouting. There's a section in here on beekeeping, raising chickens and honeybees in the city, and making compost again in a small space. Tips on how to set up different growing containers and suggestions and all that. So if you grow in a small space, I think that will be helpful for you as well. And now on to the Florida gardening. As I said, I'm in zone 9B, a block and a half from the Atlantic Ocean on the east coast of Florida. Totally Crazy Easy Florida Gardening, The Secret of Growing Piles of Food in the Sunshine State by David the Good. The secret I have found is you need to watch what you try to grow and the variety of it you try to grow as much as the time of year you try to grow. Just certain types of plants that are going to go better. And this book will tell you what they are and the best ways to grow them. I found it very helpful. And then I have Florida's Best Fruiting Plants, Native and Exotic Trees, Shrubs, and Vines by Charles R. Boning. Obviously, I've taken a lot of notes in this and marked up some things. I found this book at the library in the sale rack where the friends of the library were selling things, and I have found it immensely valuable. Then it shows you, this is what I find helpful, it's got a map of the state, and where it's green, it grows well there. Where it's light green, it'll do pretty good. Where it's yellow, if you're real careful, know what you're doing, you can make it grow. So it shows you at a glance whether this might be a good plant for my area or not. It talks about characteristics, it talks about climate, care of them, what you can do to make it grow better, all sorts of things. Oh, it even gives a handy little time of the year when it fruits so that you can plan out different things to fruit at different times. So I keep referring to this again and again for different things. And finally, I have Organic Methods for Vegetable Gardening in Florida, the second edition. This is by Jenny Stiebold and Melissa Markham. Jenny Stiebold has a number of books out, all on gardening in Florida. I have checked out a couple from the library. I finally purchased this one and have found them to be immensely helpful in explaining what to do and what not to do, what works well in Florida and what doesn't work as well because of the climate here. That goes over a variety of plants, when to plant, varieties to plant, how to mulch, compost, all sorts of different things. So if you are growing in this climate or a similar one, I recommend all of her books. So those are my recommended resources for now. I encourage you to take a look at these, read descriptions of them, see if your library has them. If you think you're interested in it, try to borrow it from the library and read through it and go, yes, this would be a good purchase. I could use this information. Or I've made a couple of notes, but I don't think I need the entire book. Then you can make a wise decision on what to purchase to add to your home library. Also, I've got in the description below, I've got all of the publication information for each of these books. I've also included a link to where to buy them. Most of them, I believe, go to bookshop.org. That is an affiliate link, but you are more than welcome to go to any bookstore of your choice. If you want to see what other people recommend, go to the Roots and Refuge YouTube channel. I'll link below. There is a playlist for recommended resources, and you can look through there and see what other people in the community have used and found valuable to help you make decisions on what would be good for you to add to your home library. So these are my recommendations. I hope you found it helpful. If you liked it, please give this video a thumbs up and also consider subscribing to the channel to follow along more in my journey of living a more sustainable and resilient life. Until next time.